months?
Well, the first thing, yes, there's quite likely to be an extension. It may not be a very long one, and he'll ride that one. But that is this is the famous getting it done story that you are officially out. Now, if people think suddenly all the European flags and rules and everything else disappeared from their lives, I think they're in for a surprise, because you then have this sort of transition period during which there are negotiations for a trade agreement, and all the talk of that sort of being done and being an extremely favourable trade deal because that's all guaranteed in advance, and that this will be done, I don't know, by Christmas next year or something. Forget it. That is a long and very difficult process. And there's not going to be much progress on trade deals with anyone else until that is at least clearer and ideally sorted, because obviously the great majority of our trade is still going to be with Europe, and other nations, other organisations are going to want to know exactly what's the relationship between Britain and Europe, because of course they're trading with both. So they need to know what the position is. So that is going to be long and drawn out, and it means that we're still going to be talking with the Europeans. There's still going to be stories coming from negotiations in Brussels and all the rest of it, just as there were, for the last 3 years or so.
Yeah.
And so the story, I'm afraid, goes on. And in fact, all the talk about get Brexit done, a more accurate slogan would have been get Brexit started. But that might not have been quite such an election winner. So there'll be there'll be a period way beyond 6 months, I think, of all this sort of negotiating. Then it will depend what the terms of the deal are, and but certain things, even things like the jurisdiction of the European Court doesn't end overnight. There is this sort of transition period. So I think anyone who thought that once you got Boris Johnson returned, that suddenly it all would be over,
it's done,
is
a fantasy.
It's a complete
We're
fantasy,
talking probably 5 minimum years to get anywhere close to.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. And now
moving on from this.
Now this then comes into the big argument about Brexit. Is it going to be a good thing or is it going to be a bad thing? And absolutely, we don't know.
We just don't know.
We don't know. But we won't know which it is until, between 3 or 5 years, I'd have thought, yeah.
Can I add a little thing into the mix here? Because the country's second favourite election analyst, obviously I'm assuming Dr. Shaw is the first, but the second favourite is Professor John Curtis. Yeah. And he has said that if you add them all up, the votes for the Remain parties in this election was at 52%, and the vote for the Leave parties was for 48%.
Yes, yeah. Now, of course, the interesting thing there is that the closeness of that margin, which of course is exactly the same as in the referendum. I have to say, I always thought that if they were to have a second referendum, I wasn't convinced it would necessarily have a different outcome from the first one, but certainly that it wouldn't be a sort of massive one. But of course, that is in direct contrast with the scale of the Conservative victory in the election.
I'm assuming that Professor Curtis is taking Labour to be a Leave party, or whether or not he's apportioned. Depends which Labour you're talking about, really, doesn't it?
Exactly, and that is the point. Yes, I think you're right. I think he is taking that, but you couldn't say that, and this is why one of the reasons why Brexit was a bugbear for them, because you didn't really know where they remain or not, because they didn't say. Jeremy Corbyn himself comes from that tradition of left-wing anti-Europeanism, of which Tony Benn was the best known example, and again, I think this he sort of kept that quiet, really, because his young supporters wouldn't want to hear it.
One of the things which Daniel Zeichner has achieved in Cambridge, I remember when Daniel did his election studio interview here on Tuesday of this week. And I put to him that there are people out there in Cambridge who don't listen to local radio, neither us or anybody else, not reading a local newspaper, and they will not know Daniel's voting record, which has been absolutely in line with the city all the way through. And they might have voted for the Labour Party as they saw it nationally. Well, his vote was exactly the same as it was last time around.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's very easy to forget that, in fact, whenever you're working in any sort of media, it's easy to forget there are a lot of people out there who don't follow it, don't listen.
There's a Cambridge bubble, there's a Westminster bubble, there's a general media bubble, isn't there?
And there's the sort of... most people are like Brenda of Bristol, if you remember her. You know,
I remember Brenda, yes.
So, well, another one.
Do you think she's going to get married to Workington Man?
Yes. I'm very interested to see that Workington went Conservative, because it's my wife's area up there, and it is an absolutely staunch Labour, or had been, of course, a staunch Labour working class area. It's almost like in the name, But no, it's very easy to forget that. Most people switch off, don't want to hear, and they only hear the messages which really get repeated and sort of push their way through, rather like Boris doing that trick with the digger and the foam plastic bricks the other day, and of course that's why they kept repeating, get Brexit done, because then the message got through, and apparently that one did get through. So in terms of all the debates, and do you vote on local, do you vote on personal, do you vote on national, there will always be a substantial number of people who don't much know or even care much about the details of the candidate. They go on the national picture.
Yeah, of course.
And it doesn't matter how good a local MP you are. And this is every election. You have really good, devoted, dedicated local MPs who've looked after their constituents, and they get rejected. And
I guess one can make a reasonable non-party political point, because we're not really allowed to have a view ourselves. I think we can say that Daniel Zeichner was a very good constituency MP.
And no, that still will be.
As one will be again. As was Julian Huppert before him. Yeah. But he was ousted by Daniel back in 2015.
Indeed, and in fact, of course, it was very close, wasn't it? It was about 599
votes that right. time around.
Exactly that, because Julian was a very good local MP, and he had a very good sort of local thing, and local image, if you like. And I was surprised when he was defeated, because for precisely that reason. And Daniel has sort of inherited that and then made it his own. And but it won't save him when the day comes. And it always does, of course. There comes a point when the electorate turns against you. And, you may have stepped down before that, but, the day always comes at some point. And it doesn't matter how good you are.
We shall see. Thank you for now. Sean Lang of Anglia Ruskin University. We'll return to you with some more questions. Now, while all this is going on here, my beloved is frantically trying to get hold of tickets for this band, who are appearing at the Roundhouse sometime next year. Votes opened this morning for this.